This is us. We are presenting as part of the RESNA Track. My name is Beth Speaker-Christensen. I'm a speech therapist working in private practice just outside of Chicago. I am a member of ASHA SIG 12, as well as a member of RESNA. I do hold an ATP, and I'm on the Professional Standards Board, which is the board that maintains the certificate. So if any of you have questions about the ATP exam, which I'm guessing that might be why you're here, I'm happy to talk to you about it. I present at local and national conferences to the amusement of all of those in attendance.
And hello, I am Sarah Bass. I am here with Beth. She was like, oh, we didn't put your name on the program, but that's okay. I exist and I am here. I am also a speech therapist. I belong to a lot of the same clubs as Beth. I also live outside of Chicago, and I present locally and nationally, much to people's chagrin.
So today we wanted to talk to you about a few different things. The reason that we do what we do for AAC is something that you guys might question now and again. So what we want to do is give you the terminology that might make sense to you so that you know why we make the decisions about AAC that we do, and then take that information of feature matching, spin it in your head as to what you would do with seating and wheel mobility. It's the same idea, right? When you need a footrest, when you need a headrest, when someone's using head array or joystick to drive, you're feature matching all of the things for seating and wheel mobility, and you're applying it to your client for what they need. You're balancing the need with what's available. We do the same thing with AAC. And so when you're thinking about the ATP exam, if that is in fact why you're here, take all of these ideas and think of how you would problem solve the entire process, and that will help you get through the exam. So the first thing we'd like to show you are the different images and the different language systems that are available. We'd like to talk to you about the Bliss, symbolic, or Fitzgerald key, modified Fitzgerald key that you might notice in devices. We're going to talk to you about access methods, which you may be more familiar with. We want you to identify some key elements of some different mainstream communication systems. And finally, we'll talk about the queuing hierarchy and modeling and prompting. So we've done this presentation at a lot of different conferences. We do this one at Closing the Gap and ATIA and whatnot. And often we'll say, well, who's here? At this conference, we kind of know who's here. Is there anyone who's not a physical therapist, occupational therapist, rehab engineer? Who am I missing? ATP. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, suppliers. I'm ATPs. I apologize. So that's the room. You want to take that one?
Oh, sure. So starting out, there is a process to getting an AAC device, just like any type of device that we might be getting for students. And the way that happens is first we see the potential in the student. And potential means that they could just be breathing. We don't want to set any prerequisites or expectations because you never know once you get the right access what a child or adult might be able to give back to you. This leads to an evaluation. It should be a team effort. If you have a speech pathologist who's kind of going out on their own, riding off into the sunset, not best practice. We want to have PTs and OTs on the team. We want to have suppliers so we know what's out there, because if a student's not in the right position, they're not going to be able to access and communicate to their best ability. So we use feature matching to do that, much the same as fitting other equipment. And then we proceed to training and intervention, which is where we get the student from the ground moving up. So we start with access, because if you can't access what the language is doing, whoops, you moved me off the slide.
I'm sorry.
If you can't access the language, then you can't activate, you can't get things moving. So like we said, multidisciplinary teams are best. We start out with what can the client see, perceive, or hear? Is this a student who has CVI? Is this a student who might have a hearing impairment? How is that going to affect the feedback that they would get on the device? We want to know what's their motor control for access. This could be, do we have a student who is direct selecting? Do we have a student who can use eye gaze? If we have a student who we think might be an eye gaze user, can they hold their head up? Do they have good trunk control so that they can remain in the same position? Are they in the right chairs so that they're positioned correctly and their head won't kind of go off the screen? And then we want to know basically how we can get through these four functions. They're very important. The operational function, can they get the device to come on? Can they get access to it? The linguistic function, Is the language matching up with what the student needs to be able to do? The social function, that's where can the student start using that device to interact with people? It's not just a one-way street of modeling and teaching. Can the student come back? And then strategic, and this one's really fun because we know that we can't get every single word in the language into a communication device. So if a student can't find their word, can they be strategic and find their way around it?
So as speech therapists, we're coming from a very specific place. We go through all those years of school, as you guys do for your discipline. But the things that we're taking into account when we're deciding on what language system or what hardware or whatever we're going to pick from, we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy, how well individuals understand the world around them. Brown's morphemes, the parts of language that are needed in order to speak at an adult level. Core versus fringe. If you haven't heard those words, I'm shocked, but the words that we use the most, which are the core, versus the words that we use 20% of the time of the fringe. Following developmental models of intervention for language, we want to work towards SNUG, which I don't know if you've heard that term, spontaneous novel utterance generation. That term was coined right here in the city of Pittsburgh. But a lot of times we don't necessarily use SNUG, we use what's called LEWIS, language output using intervention strategies. So we have to therapize these kids through the use of language in order to get them good at what they're doing. You can't just like you can't sit a kid in a power chair and say, okay, drive. I mean, you try, but we have to teach them that, this is what you do next. We know that language development takes time, and we also have to consider whether or not this person is just not having access to language, or do they also have an underlying language disorder. Many kids who have language and speech therapy in elementary school might be working on a difficulty with using the appropriate pronouns, or verb tenses, or word endings. That could be something that also presents in our non-speaking clients. We always look to our peers asking questions through ASHA SIG 12, and I am part of USAC, which is our United States chapter of ISAC, which is the International Society of AAC. I have information about our conference in Cancun this summer in July, if anybody is interested, as well as a survey that's being done if you work in the schools. If any of your peers where you work would be interested in filling out a survey, we'd appreciate that.
Learn more about AAC. Go to Cancun. That's
what we like to do.
Good selling point. So there are many choices out there, and the choices are always evolving. We put a few of the different dedicated devices or apps that you might see up here on the screen, everything from an accent to a Nova Chat to a Tobii Dynavox device, as well as the apps that you might see, such as Proloquo to Go. You might see LAMP, you might see Touch Chat, you might see TD Snap. They've changed the name a few times, so even us as speech therapists have to keep up. And when you see all these different devices in front of you, there are sometimes different ways that they mount onto a wheelchair. They might have different attachments. They might have different clips that help the device sit where it's supposed to. So we put all of these on here just to show that there are a variety of options. I know that I've had a few conversations in the exhibit hall about people saying, well, when my kids go to this center, they usually get this device. And that happens around us in Chicago too. But we want to make sure that people understand that there are so many different options out there, because best practice is to consider those options versus just saying, here you go, you get one and you get one. Just like a wheelchair, we have to make sure it's the right fit.
Did you say options? Sarah, there's more options.
There's more options. What? Now we're getting loose. All right, so when we get to more options, we know that every student is not going to be accessing that high-tech communication. So there are many mid-tech and low-tech things that can be used. Everything from something as simple as a button. I've had students initiate, like, I want to turn using the button, because they're faster at hitting the button than they might be at accessing the device. It's really great when teachers can have this giant poster in the room. Anybody see the show Speechless? Yeah. It's a great show. It's about a mom who's a really great advocate for her son who's in a wheelchair, who's really independent, but he's also nonverbal. And to speak, he uses a laser pointer that's affixed to his glasses and a low-tech communication board like one of these here. And that's his picture, or that's the actor's picture up there in the upper
We're
right-hand
sorry
corner.
it's small. We had PowerPoint problems that we're unaware of.
Beth, it's not the size. It's the content. Down at the bottom, we even have tactile symbols. Yeah, all the tactile
went too
symbols.
fast.
That's all right. So there's even tactile symbols for those students who might be learners in that realm.
Okay, that's you.
Okay, so why this one? That is a perfectly valid question to ask your SLP. Why did you choose this one? So when we are evaluating, we're looking for something where the language isn't necessarily what the student is doing now. We look for something, and it's my favorite term, the zone of proximal development.
It's a good one.
My favorite word is diedocokinetic.
Yeah, me too.
But my favorite term is zone of proximal development. That means that it's something a little harder than what the student can do. So a lot of times when students get their device, it might be something that's not easy for them in the moment, but we see the potential. We see that that student can engage with something that they can grow into something that is more difficult. So our professional ask to everyone is not to make changes on the device without either the involvement of the whole team or to have one key team member who's making those changes. Sometimes I've had people come and say, I really want to use the device in therapy, but where am I going to find my words? Where am I going to find stretch? Where am I going to find up and down? Where am I going to find forward and back?
Can't I just make a page?
You could just make a page, though it's more purposeful for the student to be able to use those words in other contexts if we have them in the device. So at that point, somebody might say, oh, that word's already in the device and here's where it is. And yeah, if it's something that the student has difficulty accessing in that moment, it might be like, well, if you assist them to get to here, then the student can say this. If you model this, it can help the student see where it is, so it's a word that they can use at a future time. So just, this is coming from the speech side. I know that in therapy, sometimes it's juggling equipment and people. So we want to make sure that everybody knows that a lot of these robust systems do have a lot of words in there. It's just finding where they're located. And we always want to say, like, we want a whole team approach. I know some speech therapists have been known to be type A. Has anyone ever met a type A speech therapist?
No.
I say I'm a type A minus.
I don't know what I am. I have a lot of ADHD, so we'll run with that.
But we always tell a team, tell the parents, stress to them, how long does it take for an infant to speak? I have an 18-month-old at home, and she's got a set of lungs on her, but there aren't a lot of words coming out. So it
with
takes a while.
that, when they get a new device, we have to remember that, again, you don't just give them a device and they know how to use it. We've chosen something that matches their skill sets, that matches what we think they're able to do and can grow with them, but we still have to teach them how to use it. So moving on, the research from Kinch and DePaula, as well as Adam's project of UWM, shows that if we don't have the right fit, it'll be abandoned. So all of their research was on abandonment. Just like, you know, we seat someone in a stroller that doesn't work. We use some sort of splint that is so uncomfortable that they wouldn't wear it for anything. We want to make sure that we take user preference into account, right? Because when you get something, somebody said, me as a speech therapist would say, well, this is my favorite, let's get that one. But the team at school hates it, so nobody uses it. Or once I leave the job, they get something different. It's too hard, so we've not been within that zone of proximal development, so it was too difficult, so there was abandonment. It was too easy, right? We didn't think highly enough of them to give them something with a challenge, so they didn't like it. It was the wrong access method. So with access, they're like, well, it's too hard for me to do it, or it takes me too long to create my messages, so I don't want to do that. And with the team preference, you know, it's not about you, it's about what's best for the clinician or the client. And so my quote here on the bottom, one of the most critical parts to successful AAC implementation is that all involved need to be on board, excited, and willing to engage and have fun. So as hard as it is for anybody to learn a system, we would expect the whole team, the teachers, the paras, the OTs, PTs, administration, anybody, to figure out, just as you would language, let's say you were learning Hindi. and you had never been exposed to it before, you might learn it in little bits and words at a time, and eventually you'd get those phrases for social stuff. We do the same thing with AAC, one word at a time, moving along, hoping that it will generalize to other communicative intents. So perception matters. If we don't think that our kiddos or our clients or anyone that has a new device can do it, they're going to sense that. And they're going to say, oh, well, if you don't think I can do it, I probably can't. And then we give them something that only has 9 buttons. And they go, well, I need to say more than 9 things. I'm done with these 9. I don't want to do it. So then we go, well, look, they're not accessing 9. Maybe we should go down to 6. And then they go, oh, wow, they really think I'm stupid. I'm not going to use this device at all. And it's just this perception wheel that goes down and down and down and down and down. And before you know it, we're not seeing success. So in hoping that we can do it, in being confident that we can learn it as a team, we're going to have better outcomes and more success.
The next thing to think about is the real estate. When you get a device, you get a finite amount of screen, and that means that the number of buttons that you can put on that screen is dictated by how well a student can perceive and how well a student can access. So if a student is a direct selector who has pretty good perception, we can get all the way up to 144 buttons on a screen. If a student has more difficulty with that, or who might be using step scanning or row scanning, we have to make sure that we're getting something where the student can, as quickly as possible, get to what they're using.
Well, and same with your ALS client, right? They get this new system, their eyes needing to use eye gaze to get to that square, determining the grid size for them on what they can get their eye to focus on long enough in order to activate the square. Those are the things we have to take into account. How many buttons are going to fit on that screen? What size screen do we need?
So after we've figured out the size of the screen, we know our real estate, then the words that we put on there are very important. The reason that we go to core words is we speak, we don't noun. We don't carpet, ceiling, light.
Book, microphone, door.
Dress.
Hi.
Chair. Chair.
I needed more. We don't talk like that. So we have to make sure that we're using the other parts of speech while we're teaching these kids. They can find cookies, they can find iPad, they can find Oreos, and even the adults, once they find the motivation to get into their device, they might find that button that we programmed that says, you know, come here, Fluffy, to call the dog over. The motivation is really high.
So we want the core easy to access, and those fringe things like our friend Fluffy or our bloob.
Oh, our bloob.
Our bloob.
We'll get into a bloob later.
Yep, you'll keep your eyes out for the bloob. So we need to know if the student is that typical or atypical communicator, as we said earlier. And when we have the language in that real estate, it's usually represented by pictures, words, or symbols, which we will also discuss.
So you're going to see devices that have all different kinds of pictures, and they're going to drive you nuts. But just know that these are the options that are there, and depending on who chose the system, this is what you're going to see. There are spelling devices that use orthography. Adults who already have language are usually pretty aggravated by the symbols. They don't need all that. They don't want to learn it. They don't want to know why that symbol means this. So for adults who are acquiring a condition, often they'll use a letter-based or word-based system. You'll find that some devices have realistic pictures. It's an actual orange. There are many systems that have the ability to have visual scenes where you can put language around the picture of the bedroom to talk about, I put my clothes in the closet, I sleep in my bed, or I'm tired. And you can have an actual picture, which helps with memory. For those adults with some memory loss, having an actual picture of their kitchen to say that they needed to use the microwave or wanted to tell you something about their home environment, that's often very helpful for those with memory loss. So when you look at these systems as OT, PTs, ATPs, and all the others, you probably look at these things and go, oh my God, shoot me. The reason we do so well with some systems is because there's words on the boxes. I don't remember what all these things mean if there's no word on the box. So we have to remember that when we're choosing pictures for the kids. The one system might look prettier, but it's because the words are on there that we're even figuring it out. We know how to read.
And the funny thing is, all 3 of those are the same word.
They're supposed to mean the same word. Anybody know what it might be?
Want. Yeah, I heard it up here, want.
How is that want? That's think, that's crazy. So the last option, besides single meaning pictures here, where you've got either symbol sticks, PCS symbols, the board maker symbols, if any of you are from schools, one picture means one word. But right here in Pittsburgh, Bruce Baker from Semantic Compaction created MinSpeak, or multiple meaning pictures, where word families were clustered together in order to make access to the language. So by hitting the apple, you're talking about food. By going to the action man, you're talking about eat. But if you go from the apple to the describing word or the adjective, you're going to say hungry. So what he's done is he's made these word webs so that you have a keyboard-based system that holds onto motor planning rather than having to navigate through pages and pages and pages and pages to get to more language. So there's reasons why SLPs might choose this. It's not to make others feel stupid. I've had paras look at me and go, "You're just trying to make me stupid?" I go, "No, actually I'm not." It's harder to learn on the front end, but after you start learning the patterns, it gets so easy. So don't be discouraged.
And I will say most often that's the one where people will say, "I hate it."
This is the one.
This is the one.
It's our favorite, but this is the one they hate the most.
very linguistically complex.
So do pictures matter? We were in a training, we worked at a school together years and years and years ago, many, many years ago now, where
not old.
a para was telling us, she goes, "I don't understand why the cookie cutters mean off." And we said, "Well, you know, off is the cookie cutters because it represents holidays and you get a day off on a holiday. Where else would you put it?" In this system, that word web thing did that. And we said, you know, "Oh, it's because of this." And she goes, "No, it's just stupid. I don't get it. You're making me feel stupid." And this teacher, Katie Alling, turned around and said, "Look, it could be a board full of drag queens. As long as the images are in the same spot all the time, and as long as they represent the language that is motivating, the students will find it." So Ms. Sayard here went into her office and created what we'd like to call the Alling board to show that the words that we need to say are more important. The concepts that we need to address are more important than the pictures. And, you know, it makes sense. Dame Edna is trouble. I don't know if you can see them because they are little.
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs. Doubtfire is silly. Anybody old enough to remember the movie Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman? He got outed because he had too much to drink, right? He got a little tipsy and gave himself up. So we're trying to get this board around the world. We're getting close. We share it as often as we can, but just remember it's not the pictures that matter so much. Don't get hung up on the pictures. So next we'd like to talk about the Fitzgerald code. The modified Fitzgerald key was created based on a system that was initiated through the Bliss symbolics, where they gave certain parts of speech color coding. We use that to remind communication partners that maybe we need more green words, right? More action words. We have lots of orange nouns. Let's pepper in some prepositions, right? It'll help us to do that. It also helps guide our eye as the communicative partner. You might notice that treadmill was under a certain color code or a color within the system. You might remember better that all of my action words or the actions I do with my feet are under the boot. It all makes sense once you figure all those patterns out. I forgot the other thing I was going to say.
The other thing you were going to say, let me read your mind here for a moment. Little Vulcan mind meld here. Is
No.
no.
So it's you.
Okay, thanks. I was totally ready for that. So we have to think about what we need to say. These are some of the functions of language, and I will differentiate because of a stupid argument on a speech news group. You don't want to get into those. Type A minus. We have to think about what we're trying to say as the functions of language. And we're not talking about functional like ABA. I know that's kind of a no in the autistic community at the moment. But we want to say, what do we need to say? I can comment, ooh, I like that jacket. I can question, where are my shoes? Hopefully they're right here still. I can protest that I don't like something that's around me. I don't like how you're stretching me. You can direct somebody, hey, can we do the left side first? And finally, requesting, because there's a lot of things I want. But we have to think, when we're friends with somebody, if they only use one of these functions, if you have a friend who's always coming and asking you for something like, hey, I want your lawnmower. Hey, I want to borrow a cup of sugar. I want to borrow your husband. No. You're not going to be friends with that person for very long because all they're doing is taking things from you. You're not getting a lot back in that relationship. So thinking about what we need to say, it's important we have a device that allows all of these functions versus just requesting.
And we don't want to teach requesting first because that's definitely going to happen if we focus on some of the other reasons for communication. we'll definitely get to requesting. So with all of the technology that's out there, we just wanted to mention that there is this rubric for evaluating apps for AAC. With all the apps that are out there, if you want to just take a look at this one, we added it in just for giggles and the other thing. Nothing that's going to change your world. So let's move on to this one.
So when we think about language and all of the functions, we see 3 nouns up here. We see a wheelchair, Play-Doh, and a cookie. So what we always do when we get people together to listen to this presentation is try to think of some alternative words. If we could not say the word wheelchair, what could we say?
Anybody have any ideas? Go. Great.
Move, roll,
sit, right? No, I don't want to get in my wheelchair. I'm happy on the floor, right? Think of the things that you would say otherwise. Play-Doh, right? I can call it Play-Doh all I want. What if I didn't have the word Play-Doh in my system and the kid really wanted to play with Play-Doh? How would he tell you that what he wanted? Make?
Squish, grab, sticky.
Blue, cup. Maybe I'm pointing or I'm gesturing to something across the room. And cookie. Everybody wants a cookie. Doesn't matter what kind, but maybe you're not into chocolate chip. What would you say if you wanted a cookie and you couldn't tell me you wanted that cookie? Snack, eat. Exactly.
Yum.
So all of these things we want you to remember.
Raisin.
We do this in other conferences to encourage OTPT speech, other non-SLP people to embrace the idea of the communication system. When you're thinking about taking the ATP exam and you're thinking about the entire process, you have to go from the screening and the assessment through the evaluation process into having a device there, teaching the device, teaching the caregivers and other team members, and making sure that it's successful. If you can take all of the process that you take in seating and wheel mobility and apply those steps to what we're showing you about AAC, those are the kinds of ideas that are going to show up on the ATP exam. I'm only going to mention that a few times, right, Andrea?
And they're not going to put a bloob on there.
No. So just because something is called something doesn't make it a something. So we've decided that, I could start calling my phone a bloob, and there's a few times that right now there's an AAC argument going around. You might have heard of GLP, Gestalt Language Processing. We're on the other side of it. So we think they've just made a something out of a nothing.
We're not GLP, we need EBP.
Yeah, you know me.
Yeah.
So moving on to our assessment on our feature matching, this might be something that you guys are more familiar with because we're talking about access. We have to put the device in a spot in front of them, around them, near them, with access that they can get to with some part of their body. And how are they going to do that? There's direct and there's indirect access. So direct access, you're going right to your target. So if you're using eye gaze, you're looking right at the word that you want to say or right at the button that you want to activate. If my friend Danny here, he's got an Apple Pencil on a unicorn horn with a belt that his dad put around his head, and he taps down on his iPad to do the lines. He's going to be in Frozen Junior this summer at his church, so we've been practicing his lines. Touching with your finger, just touching the squares, again, direct access. But then there's indirect access. If you have to scan through or move across all of the other items to get to your target, if you have to scan through row column or quadrants or blocks scanning, or if you have to go through other messages to get to your targeted message, that's indirect access. Let's go back. The advantages to direct access is it's faster, right? So we choose that. But if you have to do it repetitively over and over and over again, we quite often get fatigue. So someone with cerebral palsy who's reaching for that location over and over and over again, if they have to have their trunk controlled to get the arm moving in the way that they want to get to that little teeny tiny target that we've given them, over time they're going to fatigue. The advantages to scanning is the client can plan out where they want to go at their own pace. If their motoric abilities make it so that they have to take some time to get to that target, at least they can do it as their body is willing, which then makes that repetitive action a little bit more repeatable. That sounded terrible. Speech therapists don't usually try to put the same word twice in the same sentence. The disadvantages are, how many times do you have a client who's using scanning and you go, oh, just say it.
Like, there was the word.
Yeah, or they've missed it, they have to go back. People say, well, he's so slow. I go, yes, but he's so well-spoken. So give our communication clients a chance to get their message out. We want to be good communication partners and wait for them to finish their thought. Don't finish it for them.
And I've got one thing on there too.
Go ahead.
When you're doing this, you can either have visual scanning where it's putting a box around it, or you can have auditory scanning where the client is hearing where they are. And I just wanted to ask really quick, has anyone in here read the novel Ghost Boy by Martin Pistorius? Yes.
If you haven't, it's phenomenal. It's an amazing story.
The boy who had some kind of encephalopathy, they weren't sure exactly what it was, and he was in a coma for many, many, many years. And when he came out of it, he was locked in. And this happened in South Africa, and through time, he found someone who was there to introduce him to AAC, and he started out with auditory scanning and hitting a switch. And there is a part in the book where he talks about, okay, I wanted eggs for breakfast, and I got to eggs, and then it started scanning. Do you want them fried? Do you want it over easy? Do you want it poached? Do you want it sunny side up? Do you want it scrambled? And he listened, and he was just hoping for that sunny side up, and he missed it. And he had to listen to all those options again. And so just thinking, the person that you're working with may know exactly what they want, but waiting for that scan to come definitely takes patience, and on both parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
The user and the clinician.
Martin got sick at the age of 12. He was locked in for 2 years, and then he was
In a coma.
He was in a coma for 2 years, but still going to day programs. And it was another 10 or so years before he was able to use a functioning communication system. It's a great book. I'm friends with him on Facebook. So I hope that doesn't spoil the book. This is you.
All right, so accessing AAC, we got to talk about backing that up. Back that up. We can do a lot of strange things here. We will restrain ourselves somewhat. So we know that devices do have limited battery power, so they might die at a time during the day. We know that devices are not waterproof, so someone might throw it in a pool. We know that devices are not shatterproof. I've had a student stick a screwdriver through a device. I've had a student stick a fork through a device. I've had a student who kept pounding his device on the table and then realized if he pounded it against the corner of a chair, he could bend it. Like, think of someone bending an iPad, and this is a kid that's like, I can't push my chair. Yeah, it's like, you can bend an iPad in half, buddy. You can do lots of things.
Yeah,
so,
we call BS.
For myriads of reasons, you want to make sure there's a backup. It also might be that a student can't use a device in every position they're in. So you have a student on a mat table. And I keep saying student because I work with kids. Well,
I've got
3
more
to
adults
21.
on my caseload.
I'm 3 to 21, so it's a habit.
But devices break all the time. So obviously when working with OTs, PTs, and others, wheelchairs and access, it might not be possible to have their device in all of their places. So we have to be creative in how we get language to them, especially if you're having a PT session where you're doing some stretching. Does that hurt? You know, how are they going to tell you? Are they just being fussy? So that brings us to some low and no tech options.
A low tech and no tech can be a great backup, but they can also be a nice alternative. I had a student who was doing swimming, and that's where I had my first tub full of rice experience, because I said he needs communication. He needs it with him throughout the school day. And so someone who took me obnoxiously, literally, took it to the pool with him. And of course that went in. So we could have attached a communication board to a kickboard. We could have used something like
Called, is it in here? The Pixie Pal. I don't think we have a picture of it. I don't know
It's
why.
not in there yet. You can even use
It's like a Tupperware for communication boards. So
yeah,
it's
you can
it's
put it in and it stays waterproof. It's very nice. Even having these wristbands like the Live Strong, Lance Armstrong bands, you can order them with symbols printed on them. Even something as simple as getting like those 80s like wristbands because your wrists sweat with a yes and no on it. You can ask your client yes and no questions. So there are alternatives rather than getting some crazy mounting arm that's coming and floating overhead, looking a little scary. There are many options. One of our colleagues in the area uses these football play cards. I just thought they memorized all the things, but I guess with head injuries, they need it written down. Yep. So there are many ways that you can use low-tech options to help someone communicate when their expensive device might not be available.
So the next slide is on prompting and communication. The minute we take and prompt an utterance for a client, we've taken their turn away, right? Because we've already told them that we don't trust that you know what you want to say. The minute you hit a button, the minute you tell them what to say or whatever, we've taken their turn. So what we encourage with anybody is to use least to more prompting hierarchy. There are many of them out there to learn from if they're ever of interest to you, but hand over hand is now a big no-no. Hand under hand is preferred if you must. So if you get your hand under the hand of your client and watch their finger touch the button, that's very helpful. If we have to physically take someone's hand and put it on a button, then we might need to figure out a different way to do things to increase motivation and participation. All right, I said that. It could be that they need different levels of prompting in different situations. If something's highly, highly motivating, they're going to do something very easy. Once we get into math class or history class or something, they might not be that excited to learn about the Revolutionary War, so their participation might decrease. So we might have to prompt them as to the new vocabulary or the new items. I have a client, he's 40 and he uses a Tobii Dynavox with eye gaze, and for his 40th birthday, his brothers took him to Vegas. And so he was quick to find the button that said, I'm going to Vegas, 40/40, 2023, February 2023. He told me that every day since I met him until February of 2023. Now we can't figure out what else to talk about. So in finding those other categories of words and finding that we're really having a great explorative time looking for more things to talk about, because Vegas was over and
You could talk about your.
he stayed in
Vegas.
Yeah, all three brothers, he turned 40 and that's it. I go, what are you going to do for your 50th?
We could talk about the bloob.
Yeah. So you want this one?
Oh, sure. Communicating with people. This is a passion for Beth, so I fully expect her to add something in. So communicating with people who use AAC. This is a huge one for anyone who interacts with an AAC user. We have to remember that we are not the experts on AAC. Even Beth and I will say we're not experts. The people who use this all day, every day are the experts. There will be people out there saying, I'm an expert in AAC, and I'm always like, it's my type A minus kicking in. Each person who uses AAC is different. So even with these tips, it's always important to ask first. Some things you might want to ask are, is it okay if I access your device to show you something?
May I read your screen as you're talking? In a loud situation, you might not be able to hear the voice output. I find myself turning around to read because I can't hear very well. I think it's part of my ADHD. But anyway, you ask first, because half of my friends who use devices don't care for a minute and the other half would hit me if they could.
Like, is it okay if I complete a sentence for you? If you see what someone is trying to say, if they're starting to spell something, starting to put a sentence together, is it okay if I finish that sentence for you? Knowing that communication will take longer and allowing time and space for that. Sometimes I will ask someone a question and say, hey, I would like to know this. Is it okay if we do this while you're composing your response? Even with students in the classroom, I say to teachers, if a student's in gen ed, tell them what question you're going to ask them and give them time to prepare it while you ask other students as well, so that that student has time to put it in. You should have that backup available. Sometimes students can get across a one-word message on that backup a little bit quicker. And just think about how you communicate with your verbal clients. Not a lot changes, really. It's not that we necessarily need to slow down our speaking, but we need to slow down our listening. We need to slow down our waiting. I know it's the hardest thing in the world. In graduate school, they had us practice wait time. You guys see a smile over here. They'd have us practice wait time. So the teacher at the beginning of class, almost like mindfulness, would have us do wait times of 10 seconds. We'd close our eyes and she'd say, raise your hand when you think 10 seconds is up. And she did that throughout the semester just to see how accurate we could get with waiting 10 seconds without necessarily having a stopwatch there to time it.
My maiden name is Speaker, and I am a speech therapist. I'm not good at wait time, but I've now, after 29 years of practice, I'm pretty good at it. Knowing that it's something that's very important and respectful with our communication partners, especially having more adult friends who use devices now. Being a part of USAC was something that definitely, I ask my friends often, if I'm on the mark about things. So don't be afraid to ask. When we're looking for a device, we want to make sure that they have access to everything. And so in order to feature match, we may need to find some ways for them to access Alexa and Siri. Can they get on the internet and do Facebook and Mastodon?
I put that one in there. I'm not on Mastodon.
Are they able to independently access the remotes for the TV? There are some devices that do have the RF capabilities in order to access the television, give them the independence to do that. Can they make phone calls or text? Are there apps that they could use on their device that would allow that? Maybe not if they're only in Wi-Fi, but there are a lot of options. Do they have access to calculators? Can they get to Alta Vista or other internet search engines like Google and Hey Jeeves? And can they access environmental controls like lights and doors? All of these things are highly motivating and also very important when we think about devices, and when they've got so many things like their big wheelchair and their big communication device and everything. We don't usually have access for a lot more things, but a lot of times we can get the AT to marry, where maybe the access point on their wheelchair is how they access their device if they can toggle between the two. It could also be that they have environmental controls within their power chair. It could also be that they use the environmental controls from their device. So there's lots of different ways that we can get all of these AT options to work together. So we're going to go over this one pretty quickly because I'm sure incorporating it into a session, this is something we talk about a lot in other conferences because people are looking for ideas and ways to use the devices with their OT-PT session. More so, I want you to remember that when we get to this point, when you're thinking about like the ATP exam, when you're thinking about questions in AT in general, whether it's a grabber reacher thing, getting something off, when you're feature matching a device, how would I do any of the things in AT from start to finish? So you might offer choices in your OT-PT, O&M to increase compliance. You would increase engagement in the activity if it's highly motivating by asking, which body part should we start with? What do you want to do first? Do you want to practice with obstacles or without obstacles? Do you want to go into that room or this room? So by giving choices, we're going to increase engagement and compliance. By connecting movement and language and yoga poses and different exercises brings along a lot more choices and motivation. And it will also help our clients to regulate their environment. If they're not in the mood for something that we're asking them to do and they can't communicate that to us, by asking them if they need squeezes first or asking them if they need to change position or whatever, we'll get more buy-in.
And I will say that even if an AAC user says, no, I don't want to do that, what do we do with a verbal client who says, no, I don't want to do that? We have our ways that we get around it. So
well, you don't ask, do you want to? You say, it's time for.
It's time for.
It's time for stretching.
No, that's something that we just kind of take as valid communication.
So we ask that you be creative. Think about those ways that you can incorporate the device even into the seating eval, right? How are you figuring out, to know that they have this device? I can't tell you how many vendors I've worked with who I say, well, what about the mount? We got to get the mount on this chair. And they go, oh, he has a device? Or a parent comes to me and says, we're getting a new wheelchair. I said, oh yeah, did you get a mount and stuff too? Why? You didn't tell them you have a communication device? Yeah. So it definitely all has to work together.
Yeah, I just did a parent training. I'm starting this video and I started it with, there's a device in my kid's backpack, yikes. And Beth said, well, wouldn't they know that already? And I said, yeah. So it starts with yikes.
So for any of the engineers in the room, you might also consider, as part of the AT-AAC world, building the better mousetrap, slicing the bread differently, thinking of the thing that your client or your person hasn't yet achieved, or what's the obstacle to their communication. Knowing that you guys have that other skill set for access and you have the positioning need. I'm currently looking, if anybody finds me later, I'm looking for someone who can tell me how I can get my guy who really goes great to the right to do a head array without it being at midline. He cannot get to the left, so he's doing donuts. I was thinking he could have his right and left switches on the same side. If anybody has a solution, I'll be in the exhibit hall later. We need to think of it differently. There has to be a way for this kid to independently get through. He's in college, to not have to have a person driving his power wheelchair through the campus. Different ways to access. You know, we're talking about neuro nodes and ways that biofeedback could be our switches. Brain interface is growing. Computer brain interface is something that they're working really hard at. So for those of you who have creative minds, think outside the box and think what you could do to grow the field. As it's too little to read it, but, and that quote, the only disability is a bad attitude. The reason that's BS is because it's just not true. The social model of disability, you know, the amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has never made it turn into a ramp, never. Smiling at a television screen isn't gonna make closed captions appear. And people who are deaf, no amount of standing in the middle of a bookshop and radiating a positive attitude is gonna turn all those books into Braille. It's just not gonna happen. So we have to be thinking about what needs to happen to make things accessible to those around us. Thanks for letting me read that.
And when she said bread, it just reminded me. So we're in Pittsburgh. Has anyone had a Primanti's sandwich
Been to Primanti's yet?
Oh, yeah.
So we've done that finally. We can check.
Yeah, just saying, when she said bread, it just triggered that for me. So there are a lot of things we know we didn't cover within this hour. Things such as voices, voice selection, voice donation, and message banking. You might want to go check out Team Gleason. I know that they probably have a lot of information on this.
A lot. They're amazing.
There are Android-based options as well. Not a ton, but there are Android-based options.
Most of the common things you're going to find are going to be in iOS.
Yep, they're going to work on the Bloob. And all the mounting and hardware options, because I looked at the exhibit hall and I'm like, yep, I would not want to go through and find like a mount for each one of those. That would take me a while.
No, but see, that's where you come in and you know that it's there. You know you've got the chair as part of the process of screening to assessment to feature matching to training and all the other parts of the task with addressing AT. You have to keep all those things in mind.
And then also options for equipment for access, because there are so many different types of switches. And these are things that we know you guys are more familiar with in terms of the hardware and the switch access. But it's very similar for AAC, so it's not that scary. Do you want to do those other slides and then come back to questions? Yes. That is my now 4.5-year-old.
Yeah, he's big now, but that's a cute picture, so we always use it.
I'm just going to keep him that tiny.
So other conferences and things that we do, conferences like ATIA, CSUN, Closing the Gap, AAC in the Cloud, ISAC, and the state conferences are local. If ever you're at one of those conferences, and it's not just seating like this, get yourself to go into those sessions that are not in your wheelhouse. Learn something new, because that little pearl of wisdom that you get from one of those other sessions could be that thing that helps you to help the next client. We listen a lot to Talking with Tech, which is a podcast where you get your podcast. It's everywhere. And Min Speak Moments focuses specifically on the stuff that is our favorite, that's scary, but you know, it's interesting if you want to learn more about it. Again, I talked about USAC, which is the United States chapter of ISAC. If you'd consider joining, let me know. That was really quick. And we do have our RESNA conference coming up in July in New Orleans, which should be a great time. And again, great AT. I used to tell people I go to other conferences to learn what's available, and then I go to RESNA to learn what's kind of coming up. What are people inventing? What are they thinking up? The student design stuff is outrageous. It's amazing. So if ever you're looking for another conference to go to, RESNA's a really good one.
Yeah, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Whatever happens in New Orleans is a story you'll tell for generations.
So this is us. We've been doing this a really long time. This is us when we were teaching together quite a while ago. Our shirts match, but when we were pulling our pictures together, we realized that we don't change our clothes often enough. There's a lot of duplicates here. I have the same shirt on in 3 pictures. Totally different days, years, and everything. We do have other clothing, so thank you.
I did bring the striped shirt.
Yeah. And I made a point of leaving the flowered shirt at home. Okay. So if you guys need to get us for anything, if you want to talk about AAC stuff, as you can see, we'll talk about it ad nauseum. If you have any questions about USAC or RESNA or the ATP, I am on the Professional Standards Board, and I have lots of tricks and things that you can look at. On the RESNA website, there's a wonderful spot that talks about the task analysis. It is not specific. You're going to sit down, any of those of you who haven't taken the exam, and those who have, you'll understand. When you're a seating and wheel mobility person, you sit down and go, oh my God, there were so many AAC questions.
And when I took the ATP, I'm like, whew, it's a lot of cushion.
Yes, when we took the exam, we went, oh my gosh, wheelchairs. I took Carmen's wheelchair class when I was at UIC, and I couldn't, I said, guys, be careful of your toes. The speech therapist is driving. So the idea of learning something outside the box, but also taking everything you know about feature matching, everything you know about technology, and remembering we do the same thing in AAC, it makes it less scary. It's not that big a deal.
We also put in language. So you guys learned a new word today. Imagine if this was a device. You would have learned a completely new word just by us introducing it and making
As a
it a little
bloob.
fun. So now this is a bloob. We'll reincarnate Steve
Do you guys
Jobs.
have any questions in our last few minutes? Anything that applies to anything we talked about? Anything coming up? Yes?
So when you guys are working with like young, like early intervention, kids that are pre-literate, what is your favorite option?
So my favorite option throughout the lifespan usually stays the same, but what happens is my approach is very different. Remember that our kids, many of our kids before they go to school, don't yet, our verbal kids when they go to school have preschool language. They can say, I don't like that, I want that, I need that, whatever. Our AAC kids, they get there, they haven't had language for the first 3 years, at least language expression, and now we're expecting them to have academics. So what I tend to do in those formative years is I speak the language. I use the device. I touch the pictures. I use the system. I show them where things are. They don't know categorization. They don't know why all the furniture is together. That's a lot of stuff that kids learn, animals. These are farm animals. Those are zoo animals. So as far as the language system goes, as the team chooses, I still tend to choose LAMP and Unity, which is in the PRC devices, but Touch Chat is very popular. Speak for yourself. There's many. Proloquo, it's not my favorite, but the systems that are there, if I know them well enough, I speak the language for that person, show them where things are so that they can begin to do it themselves.
And even though the kids might not understand categorization right away, they can show you where cookie is. Like, it's
Immediately.
amazing. Like I can model it one time and kids pick that up. But or dinosaurs, or just finding the kids' interest at that age and letting them navigate to those things.
My 40-year-old client who went to Vegas has difficulty navigating through the pages to get to all the new words, but when it's time to shut down topics, shut down, yes, in a heartbeat. So motivation is very, very powerful.